Hello, 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 my lovely people, and welcome back to another episode of Scandal Queens. Last week, we gave you the royal family. The week before that, we gave you JoJo Siwa. But this week, I'm getting into possibly the deepest and darkest territory I've ever gone with you. And boy, does it apply. As you've probably guessed from the title, yes, we are talking about Gypsy Rose Blanchard. We are talking about her life, her crime, her, how she's been after prison. We're going to be talking about all of it, and we're going to be examining some really interesting patterns. We're going to look at some red flags, and we're going to ask ourselves some really, really, really big questions. Now, this episode is going to be a little bit different than my other episodes because this is my first two-part episode. There was just too much to put all in one episode. It's just too packed. It's too much. It's too lengthy. There's too many details and too many important things that you need to pay attention to. So this episode is going to be split into two parts. The first part, I want to do something that's not really been done in any of these documentaries and any of these like crime exposés. And that is, I want to deep dive, not into Gypsy Rose's life. I want to take you on a deep dive into Dee Dee Blanchard's life, her mother's life, because there is so much here that has slipped through the cracks and that really paints a picture of what happened to Gypsy and what Gypsy's potential future could be. So that's what we're going to cover here in the first episode. Now, next week, we will get into Gypsy. We're going to look at her point of view, her angle from the story, her involvement in the crime. We'll go into details about the murder, and we'll talk about what Gypsy Rose's life has been like after prison. But today, it is all about Dee Dee Blanchard. That is what we are going to be talking about today. So buckle up, because I've watched all 6 of the documentaries and series that are out about this crime and this family, and it is a doozy. It's probably going to change your whole perspective, because I know it certainly changed mine. So, Dee Dee Blanchard. This is Gypsy Rose's mother. This is the woman who was murdered in 2015. And despite all of that, we've gotten some really shoddy information about her. There's been a couple of the documentaries, like The Prison Confessions of Gypsy Rose and The Revenge of Gypsy Rose, that have painted a little bit of a picture. But we have a problem. And it's the problem that we run into with so many toxic and abusive moms. And it's this like villain or angel like hero type of mentality where people either paint her as this like perfect victim, this poor woman who just loved her child so much and just happened to be mentally ill, or she gets the other painting, which is a complete monster, which in my personal opinion is the more accurate one. But I want you to be able to make your own decision on that. So we're going to jump in. We're going to figure out who Dee Dee Blanchard was and how she ended up where she did with her daughter. Dee Dee's story starts in Shakopee, Louisiana. It's a small town outside of Thibodaux. It's a suburb of Thibodaux. Dee Dee was born Claudine Pitre, which in French is Pitre, if anybody's interested in that. It's a French-Canadian family. So they're like this French Creole family, which those of you who've watched the documentaries, you've heard her family speak, you know what I'm talking about. So this is the family that Dee Dee is born into. She's born in 1967 in this small town, Shakopee. It's one of 3 cities in the parish. Now it has around 5,000 citizens. The population's around like 5,000 people. So still a very small town, but it was even smaller in the 1960s. It was even smaller. She was born the youngest of 3 children, according to the documentary, The Prison Confessions of Gypsy Rose. Now, if you go on Wikipedia, it says that Dee Dee was born the eldest of 3 children, but I believe she was the youngest. And here's why I believe she was the youngest. There are multiple interviews from her brother and sister, Claude and Emma, and they describe Dee Dee as being the favorite child. Okay, she was the last one born. She looked the most like her mother, and her mother favored that child above and beyond anyone else. When you listen to Claude and Emma recount these memories of growing up with Dee Dee, it's really sad because kind of in a way, the way they describe it, it kind of feels like their mother didn't necessarily love them, or they were uncertain of that love. But Dee Dee was not. Dee Dee was the star of her mother's life. She was the absolute star of her mother's life, and she got everything she wanted from her mother. While the other kids had to go and work, had to, go to school every day, had to be good, upstanding citizens, Dee Dee wasn't held to that same standard. And according to her siblings, it started when she was little, and the mom said, oh, Dee Dee's got a heart murmur, so she can't do anything. So Dee Dee was treated as this like porcelain sick child. She wasn't allowed to do chores, and she didn't go outside with the other kids. And if any kids messed with her, they got in trouble, and she didn't have to go to school, and she got lots of special toys and special attention. And supposedly it was all because of this heart murmur that the mother really seemed to glom onto and really push as the narrative in this family. It was a big deal. It was like all the time, Dee Dee's got a heart murmur, leave her alone. Dee Dee's got a heart murmur. Now, the siblings claim that they don't think Dee Dee had a heart murmur. Claude and Emma claim this because they said Dee Dee was just like every other normal kid. She could do anything she wanted, but she chose not to. And she, even as a kid, was used this like, I'm sick, leave me alone. In school, around the house, with other people. She would get other people in trouble. As the three siblings grow up in this Pitre family, the cracks become more and more obvious. Dee Dee gets given cars. She goes to college for a little bit and her parents pay for it. They give her money all the time. If you go and watch that Prison Confessions of Gypsy Rose, there's old home footage as well. And they show Dee Dee being handed wads of cash. And like she's getting gifted Cabbage Patch dolls, which in the 80s were a really big deal, very expensive, very hard to get their hands on. And you can see the siblings watching in the background with just like flat faces like, yep, there goes Dee Dee. Getting all the attention, getting all the love, getting everything that all of us should be getting. And I think that's really interesting. I think this dynamic is so interesting considering what we know happened later, right? Because we know Dee Dee adopted this Munchausen's by proxy and used it to abuse Gypsy. And it's very funny because what did her mother do with her? Used an illness that she didn't really have to get a lot of attention for herself and for Dee Dee and to kind of triangulate and punish and alienate the other children, which is exactly what happened. And that's something that we see in narcissistic homes. We see a lot of triangulation. And typically triangulation can be like one narcissistic parent going to one of the three siblings and talking bad about the other two. It can be that, but it's not always that direct, right? Sometimes triangulation in these families happens by showing favoritism. By Dee Dee's mother showing everyone that Dee Dee was her favorite child, she was actually turning the other two against him. She was creating battle lines between the siblings. She was fostering distrust between the siblings. She was fostering resentment and animosity. And it doesn't really seem to have been good because as Dee Dee got older, Claude and Emma described her as a criminal. They said she was a spoiled brat and a criminal. She wrote bad checks. She was doing credit card fraud, and all this other kind of stuff. When her mom dies, which we're about to talk about in a second, she like expands that and gets credit cards in her mom's name and all this crazy stuff. But they basically said, as a teenager turning into a young adult, Dee Dee is just this self-centered, I will have what I want when I want. And she thinks that she's better and more special than everyone else. So let's just stop there for a second and really take a look at this person that we have. Dee Dee is an adult. She's a young adult. She's living in a small town, very, very small. And she's being raised by a woman who tells her, you're better than everyone else around you. You're special. You deserve special treatment because you're different. And that different makes you better than others for no other reason than I've just told you you're better than others. Okay, so we've got this woman who thinks she's more special than other people, and she's living in a small town, which her siblings said, she thought that was kind of beneath her. She thought she was better than that life, and she was always kind of scrabbling for a more grandiose lifestyle for herself. And the reason I think that this is really important to pay attention to before we go into what happens next is because this paints such an interesting picture. Because if we look at that image of Dee Dee, we're already seeing narcissism. You can't not see it. You can't not see these narcissistic traits. The grandiosity, the willing to harm others, which may even be psychopathy. The I will have what I want, my needs matter more than everyone else's, and I should be handed things without having to do anything for them. Very, very, very narcissistic. And why I think this is so important is because in the 1970s, there was a psychoanalyst whose name was Heinz Kohut, and he was one of the first people to design a theory of how narcissism happens. And according to Kohut, the way narcissism developed in children, other than like genes and stuff, which he didn't know about, was two parenting styles. One, the cold and aloof parenting style, where the child basically gets ignored and gets none of their needs met, very, very neglectful. And the second parenting style, which is the kind of grand self. It's spoiling the child. It's telling the child no matter what they do that they're so good and they're better than everybody else and they're the best without having to work for that, without needing to be a good person or to even grow in any way for that. And that is certainly what was happening with Dee Dee Pitre, as she is at this time, with her mother. That is how her mother was treating her. And in my personal opinion, I think this is where we see this female narcissism cycle in this family gearing up, kicking up, because there's a very good chance Dee Dee's mother was a narcissist as well, who may have also been dealing with Munchausen's by proxy, because she certainly treated her child that way. And she took her youngest and kept her youngest child in this kind of weird state of arrested development in order for her to keep that attention as a mother, to keep getting that supply from her quote unquote baby. And this is how these narcissistic cycles, these patterns of behavior generate in these families. Dee Dee's mother used her for supply and narcissism, and then Dee Dee ends up doing the same thing to her child later. It is a vicious, vicious cycle, and I think that this is where it all began. So we've got a pretty clear picture now of who Dee Dee was becoming as a child and into her young adulthood. And that's kind of the next time we pick up in Dee Dee's story. And again, Gypsy's not even here yet, right? So brace yourselves, because this has been very carefully avoided in all of the documentaries that you've been watching. It gets mentioned, but it doesn't get addressed for what it is. So we get to 1990, 1991. Dee Dee is 24 years old. She's a 24-year-old woman living in this small town, getting all this special attention and starting to visualize who she's going to be, right? She's been handed everything by her parents, and now she wants a man. And she goes out and finds one. She finds Rod Blanchard, who she's immediately attracted to and immediately goes after and tries to charm. And she does. Here's the rub. 24-year-old Dee Dee was going after a 17-year-old child still in high school. That's right. When Dee Dee started chasing Rod and got involved sexually with Rod, he was 17 years old and in high school. She was a 24-year-old adult. Now, according to Rod, and I believe, again, he mentions this, they mention it kind of briefly, very briefly, like one sentence in Gypsy's Revenge, but in the prison confessions of Gypsy Rose, he goes a lot more in depth, and he says, yeah, she lied to me, actually. I didn't know she was 24. He thought she was like 20, 21, so younger, still not good, still no one who should be messing with a 17-year-old, but this is the early 90s in small town Louisiana, so we're just going to go with that. So Dee Dee lies to him about her age, and Rod's like, wow, she's really pretty, she's really charming. He said she was so bubbly and so positive and smiled and laughed all the time. So he was like, yeah, let's have some fun. And they did. He said they had a lot of fun. She was very charming. They get along really well. Too well, obviously, because Dee Dee gets pregnant very, very soon after they meet. Somewhere in there, Rod finds out that she's actually 24, and he's, again, still 17, but he says, you know what, we're just going to go with this here. She's pregnant. I'm going to do the right thing. So the two of them get married while he's a 17-year-old high schooler and she's a 24-year-old adult because she's pregnant. And Rod Blanchard said, yeah, I was going to do the right thing. I'm going to be a father. I've done this. I've gotten myself into this. Let's do it. So he marries Dee Dee, makes her Dee Dee Blanchard. and they settle down and get ready to welcome their first baby and start a family together. Until 3 months into the marriage. About 3 months into the marriage, Rod turned 18. And the story he tells is that he woke up on his 18th birthday and looked around and went, "What have I done? I can't do this." So according to him, he goes to Dee Dee and says, "Look, it's not your fault. I'm not in love with you. I'm not in love with you. I'm going to do the right thing. And I love our child, and I'm going to take care of this child when it comes. But you and me are gone." And he walks out on her on his 18th birthday. Now, he says that's when he saw a dramatic flip in her personality and her behavior. He described her up until this point as the quote unquote perfect Southern wife, just like always doing what he wanted and cooking and cleaning and getting ready for their baby and, visiting family and stuff like that. But he said when he told her he wasn't in love with her, she snapped. He said she just got really cold, weirdly cold with him, threw down their wedding certificate, which apparently was framed on the wall, and smashed it and threw a big fit. So, some of that you can understand, right? But let's not forget who we're talking about. We're talking about someone who could potentially have narcissistic personality traits. So being walked out on is not necessarily heartbreaking for them. It's humiliating for them. It is humiliation to the extreme, especially when you consider this is a small town. They are living in a small town. Everyone would have known that Dee Dee, the 24-year-old, got dumped by her now 18-year-old husband, and that she was now a single woman about to give birth to her first child in this small town. Not good. It is not good. But anyway, Rod, he stays involved. He says, I'm still going to do the right thing, even though I'm not going to be living with you, Dee Dee, or in a relationship with you. So apparently he still comes around all the time. He starts making payments immediately. He pays for Dee Dee's house so that she can stay there and she doesn't have to work. And then Gypsy Rose is born on July 27th, 1991. Now, Rod is already gone. He is already out of the house. But like I said, he is highly involved. He's still highly involved at this point. And according to Rod, when Gypsy was born, completely normal. He said the birth was normal. The baby was normal. They do all the tests and checks and everything when the baby comes. Everything was fine. There was nothing wrong. So they kind of settle into this new reality of this blended family with Rod coming and visiting and trying to keep the child and paying money, yada, yada, yada. But him leaving Gypsy alone with this woman, Dee Dee, who thinks she's special, who thinks she's better than everyone else, and who's just been humiliated in front of the town, it kicks off what will become the mess that we know. So now is where I like to call this section Mommy Dearest. Mommy Dearest. And this is where we start to see the ramping up of the Dee Dee Blanchard who will be murdered in 2015. Now, before we get into this, because this is where the Munchausen's is going to take place, this is where I believe you are going to see even more narcissistic traits and perhaps even dark triad traits, right? So that's narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. I think that's what we're about to see. But let's check in, right? It is 1991. Dee Dee has just given birth to her first child. She has been left by her 18-year-old husband. She is not loved necessarily by her siblings, but she is, mommy's girl, and mommy is still alive, and she's still being babied by mommy. And that is who we meet in 1991 when she becomes a mother and gives birth to Gypsy Rose. Now, Rod said that the birth was normal and that everything was fine and that for the first few months of Gypsy's life, everything's fine. But then what I believe to be one of the first triggering incidents occurs. Before Gypsy turns 1, she is revealed to have a condition called strabismus, which is like an extreme lazy eye that can result in blindness. So before she's even a year old, Gypsy has to have surgery on her eye. Now, remember who her mother is at this point. This woman who's been humiliated and rejected, who thinks she's better than everyone else, and who has now just had a child, which gets her a lot of attention. Well, guess what happens when the world finds out that Gypsy has to have eye surgery? Dee Dee gets even more attention. She gets even more attention. This is around 91 or 92. Gypsy goes into the surgery and Dee Dee lets everybody know about it. Okay. She gets a lot of attention. She gets a lot of sympathy. A few months later, again, Gypsy is not even a year old yet. She starts to claim that Gypsy's got sleep apnea. Sleep apnea. So by the time she's a year old, Gypsy is sleeping through the night on a sleep apnea, like a heart monitoring machine. This is when some members of the family started to go, what? That seems a bit weird, because when they would see the baby would seem normal. But she's saying, oh, she's got to have these eye surgeries and she's got to have this heart monitor. According to Rod at this point, Dee Dee wouldn't even leave Gypsy alone for an hour. She was completely attached to Gypsy, would not be away for Gypsy, not even for a moment. And Gypsy starts to get older. She gets into her toddler years, and there's not really a lot else that gets thrown around, right? We've got the eye problems. We've had some talk of sleep apnea, but that's about it. And that's enough, right? Because people are still starting to feel so much pity for Gypsy. They're like, this poor baby's had to have surgery. This poor mother has had to deal with giving her baby surgery. There's a lot of pity and attention that's being thrown around. Here's what's really, really interesting. You might think that this is when we start getting the wheelchair and the shaved head and like the crazy Yolanda cabinet of medicine, but it's not. Somewhere in here, Dee Dee decides that the best way to get attention is not to keep pushing medical accidents. It's actually to put Gypsy in beauty pageants. Child beauty pageants. I was shocked when I was watching that Prison Confessions of Gypsy Rose and they start playing pageant videos of toddler pageants that she was put in with the big expensive fluffy dresses and all of that. Dee Dee took her toddler and started peddling her toddler in child pageants. And for me, myself, I can't help but to see that as a continuation of the attention seeking, the supply seeking, using that child as the product to receive supply. Dee Dee got hit with all that attention, like, oh my gosh, you're having a baby, you're a mommy. And then she had the sick baby that she got all the attention for. Now she's going to get attention for having the most beautiful baby and putting the baby in pageants. But unfortunately, and this is not mean, but like, Gypsy was just not, a Gerber baby. She was not a Gerber baby. She didn't do well in pageants. So she wasn't in pageants for long. Dee Dee wasn't getting the supply she needed out of the pageants. So 4 years old, she pulls her out of the pageants. I can't help but wonder, and this is just like a little aside, I wonder if we would even be here having this conversation if Gypsy had been pretty. If Gypsy had been a traditionally good-looking child and woman, we probably wouldn't be here, because her mother would have just run her ragged through the pageant circuits and she'd probably be Miss America or something, and like stuff never would have happened. But unfortunately for Gypsy, she wasn't lucky enough to get that. So she gets pulled out of the pageants, and that is when, right around this time, she gets pulled out of the pageants. That's when Dee Dee starts telling stories of seizures. She says, Gypsy's getting seizures. Gypsy's getting seizures. She's got eye problems and seizures, and she has to be on anti-seizure medication. Now, I don't know if any of you listening to this have ever been on anti-seizure medication, but I was. I was on anti-seizure medication for about a year for some seizures that I had that they ended up finding out was caused by medicine. But that anti-seizure medicine zombifies you. It turns you into a zombie. And if you go and watch the Prison Confessions of Gypsy Rose, there's a shocking video of Gypsy getting ready for her first day of school. So she's around 5 years old at this point, and she's stoned out of her mind. She's stoned out of her mind. Like, she's not responding. The mom's like, wave, Gypsy, wave. And you can literally tell, just look at that kid's eyes. You can tell that kid is stoned out of their mind. It's because she's on an anti-seizure medication. Because the mother has gone and said, she's having seizures. And that was not the case. Also interesting about that video is 5-year-old Gypsy is still on a bottle. She is still on a bottle, which all the parents out there will know how bad that is and how big of a red flag that is. So all of this is happening right around 4 years old to 6 years old. And it's around this time that Gypsy according to, again, her Prison Confessions documentary, says that her mom starts telling her things like, your dad left us because you weren't a boy, and starts kind of heaping on this emotional abuse and implanting this idea of, I'm the only thing that you have. No one else in this world wants you, which very stereotypical and abusive, dysfunctional, toxic, narcissistic parents, right? Now, around 6 years old, Gypsy's grandmother dies. This is Dee Dee's mother. So this is in 1997. Remember, Dee Dee's mother is the one that defends her in the family. So she does a crime. Dee Dee's mother says, leave her alone. She didn't mean it. She bullies someone. Leave her alone. She didn't mean it. Poor Dee Dee. Dee Dee's special. Dee Dee's better than the rest of you. Dee Dee gets what you can't have. This person dies. This is the person who has validated all of Dee Dee's terrible behaviors and all of the awful things that she's done. And she dies. So obviously this is going to leave Dee Dee in a state. According to her siblings, she took it bad. She took the death of her mother bad. And of course she would. That was like her anchor. That was what made her special. This is, I think, even worse for Gypsy, because we're going to see more ramp ups and escalation. When you have a major emotional event like that for a narcissistic person, they can get really unhinged. They can start lashing out. They can also feel like, hey, I don't care about anything now. I'm going to do whatever I want. And that certainly seems to be what happened with Dee Dee. She further isolates Gypsy. She starts moving around to different projects in the area, project housing. The family says they see Gypsy less and less and less. She's around 7, 8 years old at this time. And Dee Dee ramps up her financial crimes as well. She gets a bunch of credit cards in her mother's name and runs up thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in debt. She starts writing bad checks all over town, which is highly illegal. And obviously police were coming after her. And it's also when she claims that Gypsy's got a new problem. According to her, this is when Gypsy develops such severe acid reflux that she has to have a feeding tube put in. This is when the feeding tube gets put in, around 7, 8 years old. Now, what I really find interesting about that is if you go and watch that Prison Confessions of Gypsy Rose, there's lots of experts who come in and give testimony. And according to the one that comes in and speaks about the different Munchausen's by proxies that might have been going on here, she said that the feeding tube is one of the most common forms of abuse in these types of situations. So this is something that happens in the majority of Munchausen's by proxy cases. It's one of the biggest tells and red flags, especially when that child is left on a feeding tube for an extended period of time. And it's how these parents basically get control, because once there's a feeding tube in your child, they have complete and total control of every aspect of that child's life and care, because there's so much that has to be done for those feeding tubes. So this is a significant moment. We are seeing Dee Dee really become unhinged here and lose control and start to ramp up not just the financial crimes, but also this Munchausen's by proxy, having medical stuff done to Gypsy. She also gets tubes put in her ear during this time. Now, the next huge moment is... I think she is around 7 or 8 years old, right? So this is going to be around 1997 or 1998. Gypsy is riding on the back of a motorcycle with her granddad, Dee Dee's father, Claude. His name's also Claude. And there's a wreck. The granddad has a wreck with Gypsy on the back. Now, Gypsy's fine. It wasn't that bad. She just got a scraped up leg. Her mother finds out and loses her mind. She rips Gypsy home, bandages up her whole leg, and puts her in this huge Franken brace that someone would have for like an ACL tear. And the family's like, oh my God, we didn't think it was that bad. Gypsy herself didn't even know it was that bad, but her mom apparently brought her home. It was like, you're not going to be able to walk. This is terrible. Sure enough, according to Gypsy, a few days after that wreck, her mother showed up with a wheelchair and told her to get in it, that she couldn't walk anymore and she needed to be in a wheelchair. The family, the Petre family and the Blanchards were obviously confused at this point, because they're thinking she just got scraped up and she's in a wheelchair. Dee Dee says, yeah, she's got muscular dystrophy. Out of nowhere. Out of nowhere. She just claims that Gypsy, now like 7, 8 years old, has muscular dystrophy, and that it had something to do with the motorcycle wreck, and she now can't walk anymore, and she's going to be in a wheelchair for the rest of her life. Obviously, the family was shocked, but no one questions mothers, do they? No one questions mothers when they tell these stories because, of course, they're telling you, like, she's not going to be able to walk. And so people just heaped pity on Dee Dee, heaped pity onto Gypsy. Here's what I think is wild about this, right? If you go and watch this story being told in the prison confessions of Gypsy Rose, the granddad tells this story about right around this time. Gypsy comes over in the wheelchair and Dee Dee leaves her there so Dee Dee can go and do some work. So Gypsy's at her granddad's house and her mom's gone. They allege that Gypsy got out of the wheelchair, got on the trampoline, and spent the afternoon jumping on the trampoline with the rest of the kids. And this is when she's supposed to have muscular dystrophy and not be able to walk. The sad part of that story is that they said that as soon as her mother pulled up in the driveway, she dropped like a leaf. She dropped like a leaf and acted like she couldn't walk in front of all the other kids. Now, the family said that was like that was like almost an ending. They said after that moment, Dee Dee hit the roof and didn't want any of them to have anything to do with Gypsy. That was the end of her just being like casually left at their house, casually being a part of the family. That was it. But of course, they started to have some serious questions. They started to say, Dee Dee, she can walk. Why is she in a wheelchair? So what do you think Dee Dee's move is to this? She's now been cornered. People are asking her questions. They have some doubts. She tells them that Gypsy has leukemia. Out of nowhere, she says Gypsy has leukemia. She's been diagnosed with leukemia. She has to take all this cancer medication. She's going to lose all her hair. That's how Dee Dee got herself out of trouble of being questioned about the wheelchair. And of course, in secret, there's no cancer. She's at home shaving Gypsy's head. She's at home shaving Gypsy's head and telling Gypsy, no, you have cancer and the medicine's going to make you lose your hair. So we're just going to go ahead and shave it. Absolutely nuts. Absolutely nuts. So after that blow up, Dee Dee moves even further away from her family. She takes Gypsy and she goes to New Orleans, which is a long way away from where they were, far enough that it becomes more difficult for these working class individuals to get to Gypsy to help her, which, as we know, that was exactly what the intention was. So the next big kind of significant moment is one that also doesn't get enough attention. And that's what happened in 2000 to Dee Dee Blanchard. So in the year 2000, Dee Dee has taken Gypsy away from the family. She's claiming Gypsy has muscular dystrophy and leukemia, that she can't walk, that she's on all these medications. She's also claiming that she is mentally disabled. And they are living in New Orleans, away from the rest of the family. Gypsy is 9, 10 years old at this time, and they get into a severe car accident. Okay, Dee Dee and Gypsy get into a really bad car accident. Now, Gypsy is fine, but Dee Dee's foot is almost severed from her leg. It's a very, very, very severe injury, and she ends up spending a lot of time in hospital. So Gypsy has to go and live with Dee Dee's family. Don't know why she wasn't sent to live with her dad. I'm assuming he wasn't really stable at this time because he had been like living with friends and stuff. So she goes to stay with her grandfather and her aunt and uncle. The Petras, I don't know, Petra is probably how you pronounce it. While she was there, the family was obviously concerned, right? They're like, oh my God, she's got leukemia. She can't walk. She's on a feeding tube. She can only eat Pediasure through her feeding tube. They were obviously very scared and they wanted to create the right environment for her. They said the whole time she was there, she ate like normal. She was eating tons of food. She ate everything that all the other kids ate, but she stayed in the wheelchair. She stayed in the wheelchair, but it was enough for them to start asking questions. The longer she was with them, the more normal she was acting. She didn't seem like she was mentally disabled. She didn't seem like she was as sick as she was being painted, and she could surely eat without the feeding tube. So the family is getting weirded out. They're asking questions. And what is Dee Dee not going to like? She's not going to like questions. I think it's important to note, this is a side note, According to Gypsy, during this time, she alleged that she was also molested. Those allegations came out later. There's no way to verify that. Her family vehemently denies that, but that's common in families where there's abuse. The granddad's response to it could be pretty icky. But also it just kind of paints questions. The grandfather claimed that Gypsy from a young age would try to touch him, which he thought was really, really, really inappropriate and tried to stop. I don't know what the truth there is. I tend to believe victims. And I'm just putting this in here so that you can kind of make your decision on that. Now, Dee Dee gets out of the hospital after quite a while, and she's livid when the family starts asking her questions like, why is Gypsy eating normally if she has to be on this feeding tube? Why does she not seem sick, even though she's got leukemia? So Dee Dee just moves. Dee Dee takes her and just moves away from all of them, and they start seeing Gypsy less and less and less and less. The father during this time, he's also getting less and less time to see her. He's allowed to talk to Gypsy on the phone, but visits become more and more restricted. Now, these are the years 2000 to 2005, and it's the same thing. We see Gypsy getting quote unquote more sick, but there's no one like directly around her to verify that. This is just kind of what people are seeing and being told it is a distance. She's in the wheelchair full time. She's having her head shaved. This is also when we see Dee Dee creating the Yolanda cabinet, is what I call it. For those of you who watch The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, you know about Yolanda's medicine cabinet. And there's a cabinet in Gypsy's childhood home that looked very, very, very much like that. And it seems like this is what life is going to be, right? It seems like it's just going to be Dee Dee running around, running her scams, telling everybody that her daughter's sick, and, you know, just the usual supply and demand of a narcissist. But then 2005 happens and Hurricane Katrina hits. Now, Hurricane Katrina ends up being a catalyst for Dee Dee and Gypsy, and it is the reason that you know their names right now today. If Hurricane Katrina hadn't happened, you probably would have no idea who Dee Dee Blanchard and Gypsy Rose Blanchard were, because Hurricane Katrina is the turning point that changes their lives forever. So obviously, horrible, New Orleans all but destroyed, and the house of Dee Dee and Gypsy is destroyed in that. The media picks the story up. They pick up this story of this poor disabled child with leukemia and her poor, hard done by mother who've had everything destroyed. So what do you think good people do when they hear this story that's been crafted by Dee Dee? They have Gypsy and Dee Dee airlifted out of New Orleans and flown to Aurora, Missouri, where they are housed and taken to Mercy Hospital and given first-rate, top-tier medical care. That's right. It blew up. It was a huge news story. Rescuing this child from Hurricane Katrina, rehoming them, Good Samaritans, the whole shebang. Their faces were all over the news, all over social media, videos, interviews. Dee Dee was just living her best life. If you go and look at that stuff, she's just beaming and jolly and happy. And when you watch these documentaries, that's what everyone talks about as well. They're like, well, we just didn't know because Dee Dee was just such a happy, jolly, cheery person. And it's like, yeah, because every time you guys were around her, you were giving her the supply she wanted. You were like throwing money at her. You were like introducing her to celebrities and giving her free trips to Disney World. Of course, she was always jolly and happy around you. You were doing what she wanted you to do, which of course is how narcissists work. So the two of them become media sensations, and they go to this Mercy Hospital to get care. And that's where an interesting thing happens. So they go to Mercy Hospital, and Dee Dee and Gypsy are introduced to Dr. Bernardo Flasterstein, who he is in the Prison Confessions of Gypsy Rose. So if you want to go and hear his side of the story on this, go and listen to it. He basically says he felt good. He wanted to help this child whose life had been destroyed by Katrina. So he meets Gypsy and he meets Dee Dee. Dee Dee says, all of Gypsy's records have been destroyed in the hurricane. I don't have any of her records, but she's got cerebral palsy and leukemia. So the doctor goes, right, well, I can't just give you treatment for that. So we got to run some tests. So this Dr. Flasterstein runs tons of tests. I think they do some muscle biopsies. They put Gypsy in an MRI machine. They run all these tests. And he comes back to Dee Dee and says, there's nothing wrong with this child. This child can walk. Like, for sure, this child can walk. Let's get her up and get her to walk. Dee Dee throws a shit fit. Throws an absolute temper tantrum and storms out of the hospital and says, I will never come back here again. And she doesn't. But this is what's interesting. After she left, the doctor wrote in his notes that he believed Dee Dee was showing signs of Munchausen's by proxy and that Gypsy was a victim of that. He wrote that in the notes, but he did not report it to CPS. Now, if you really want to get frustrated, here's the extra rub. He was legally required to report that. But he didn't report it because he was afraid of getting in trouble, he claims. However, that's not the law. The law is any physician who makes that kind of a report is protected in case it ends up being false. So frankly, he just didn't do his job. And because he didn't do his job, we have everything that happens next. Which is Dee Dee and Gypsy leave the hospital and go back to their home in Aurora, and Dee Dee just keeps the scams going. They're still getting lots of media attention, so they take all the interviews that they can. They keep building this media circus around themselves. It results in a free home from Habitat for Humanity. Habitat for Humanity comes and on camera gives them a free custom-built home. It is customized so it could be more accessible for Gypsy in her wheelchair. So they like lower the light switches and they build this huge ramp. And then here's the real kicker. They gave her a hot tub. The house had a hot tub because Dee Dee said she needed it for her muscles. Gypsy needed it for her muscles. This becomes the game for Dee Dee. She suddenly realizes we got a machine here, and she milks it for all that it's worth. They get this house for free. They get trips to Disney for free. Gypsy starts meeting a bunch of celebrities and taking photos with them. The dad at the same time is getting scammed for a ton of money. He's all the way back in Louisiana. They're in Missouri. Dee Dee has told him he can no longer see Gypsy, but he can talk to her on the phone as long as he keeps sending money. And she keeps saying that, oh, she's got this medical thing and this medical thing and this medical thing. So he ends up sending about $150,000. And he's like doing all this through child support. And it's really, really sad. And at the same time, there's a huge Facebook group that gets started. Gypsy is constantly in this Facebook group. Dee Dee's constantly in the Facebook group. There's a red flag over documentation of Gypsy's time in the hospital, all these things that are going on with her. It's really like, if you want to talk about narcissism, it is an audience. Basically, Gypsy has an audience at all times. Her mother now has an audience at all time. It's very worrying, and it's more worrying that there was like millions of people in these groups not seeing any of these red flags and just all believing they were like lifting up and building a new life for a disabled girl and her mother. Now, all of those last points talking about the celebrities and the free trips and the free house and the gifts and all the money that was being donated to them, that's important because, as it turns out, these are complementary symptoms of malingering Munchausen's by proxy. Malingering Munchausen's by proxy. This is when a parent commits Munchausen's by proxy, gets into this for financial gain. They make their child sick. They tell everyone their child is sick. They keep their child in this perpetual state of juvenilehood. We saw this with the Turpin family. For financial gain, for that supply, for that sympathy. And that is certainly what we are seeing here as the escalations get to where we will later pick up. We see a person, a mother, who has so little empathy for her child that she is sedating her constantly. She's telling everyone and the child that she's mentally delayed. She's Gypsy's teeth were rotting out of her head by this point because of all the unneeded medication she was on. Dee Dee had her salivary glands removed so that she wouldn't be able to drool. She subjected her to muscle biopsies, to surgery, so she wouldn't be able to vomit anymore. She's doctor shopping around. And the whole purpose of this hell that she is raising her daughter in, is strictly for supply. It is strictly for supply. And it's not even just financial, because she was getting enough money to live from her ex-husband. It is to game money off of who she thinks are essentially fools, idiots, morons who are lesser than her, less intelligent than her, less deserving than her. You're seeing so much of this like narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism, that dark triad that I talked about, where she will say and do literally anything, no matter who it hurts, to get what she wants. This is the culmination of who Dee Dee Blanchard is. This is that child who got raised in the beginning and told, you are special. You are more special than everyone around you, and you deserve whatever you want, even if you have to hurt other people to take it. That is who Dee Dee Blanchard is in this moment. And that is the mother that we are going to pick up with in part 2 when we take a deep dive into Gypsy Rose, the second part of this chapter, who she became, her part in the murder, and who she is today. What do you think? Does this paint a little bit of a different picture than what you were led to believe, what you perhaps have been led to believe throughout the course of this story, through the trial, through the prison, through everything? It doesn't end here. The story gets much, much crazier, and we're going to get into that in the next time. We are going to cover the murder, how it happened, when it happened. I'm going to be talking about Nicholas Godejohn. I'll be talking about Gypsy. We're going to be breaking down some of the footage from the interrogations. And more importantly, we're going to be talking about Gypsy and who she has become since she's gotten out of prison, because I think we are already starting to see some patterns repeating, and it all ties in. It's not just narcissism, because in this next part 2, which will be out next week, we're also going to talk about how celebrity has now gotten tied into this and the effects that it could be having. So hopefully you're going to be here for next week. You're going to join me for the conclusion to this deep, dark dive into the Gypsy Rose and Dee Dee Blanchard saga. It is absolutely crazy, and I think there are so many lessons. I certainly am seeing shades of my own mother in this story, who didn't go to this extreme, but who certainly got a lot of attention for keeping me constantly in different doctors, doing everything but getting my mental health, ADHD, and everything else dealt with. There's a lot in here. And more than anything else, there's examples of cycles, patterns, how these patterns repeat in families and how they continue to harm us generation after generation. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you liked it. I hope you'll be back for next week. If you've got questions, go ahead and tap that link at the top of the description. You can send me a text message. Let me know what you thought of the episode. Let me know what you want to hear more about. If you've got questions, shoot them off to me. You can do all that via text. If you loved the episode, please head over to Apple Podcasts, leave a quick 5-star review. It helps people find me. It helps with this work, because it does take a lot of work. I've been probably spent like 15 hours or more just in like research mode, and so please go ahead and leave that 5-star review if you feel like it. I would be so forever grateful. And don't forget that you can follow Scandal Queens on Instagram and TikTok at Scandal Queens Podcast. We'll be releasing more videos there, some recordings, and I'm also going to be releasing some of the stuff from this court case, which will be both on Instagram and TikTok. So make sure you go and follow the podcast there, and you can follow me at The Real Evie Johnson everywhere that it matters. Instagram, TikTok, whatever. If you'd like to follow me and hear more about the work that I do with victims of narcissistic abuse and breaking through the cult of toxic celebrity, then you can absolutely come and join me there. For everyone else, I hope you will join me again next week, because it's going to be good. But until then, keep your heads up, keep your eyes on the stars, and keep moving forward. Bye-bye.